Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you, committee members, and to anyone who's watching this on YouTube, welcome. We are excited to have a special 1 hour session tonight featuring Jan Johansson. Am I saying that right?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Um, and I'm thinking that we're going to hold committee member questions until the end, unless Jan tells us otherwise. But we're just excited to have your expertise. So Jan has been working with the town as a planner, and I'm going to let him give background and explain what that means. And if you could give us just a quick little background on what you do, that would be fabulous. So I'll pass it over to you without further ado. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Good to see so many familiar faces and names on the panel. Yeah, it's Jan Johansson, Kellard Sessions. We've been the town's planning, engineering, and wetland consultants since, I believe, 2008. So in that capacity, we have been involved in reviewing and assisting the planning board primarily in land development applications that are under their review. We issue or review and issue wetland permits and stormwater permits under the wetland and stormwater laws. And we assist the town board with any sort of planning in relation to, capital improvement projects, anything that involves modifications to local laws or zoning. So it kind of runs the gamut. So kind of as needed. And, over that period of time, I feel like I had a pretty good grasp on what's going on in Lewisboro. I hope to think that. And I'm happy to be here this evening to speak with you all about the comprehensive plan and the beginnings of that process. And I could kind of just take it from scratch and just kind of walk you through, both for your edification and the general public's, and then just kind of have a Q&A if that works for you. I'm happy to do that. So if that sounds good, we can just take it step by step. But so comprehensive plans, master plans, I think the terms are the same. I don't think there's any real difference between the two. So the New York State land use statutes or New York State law requires that zoning laws be adopted in accordance with the comprehensive plan. And if you wanted to get down into the weeds, you could look at town law section 272A that applies to all towns in the state of New York with relationship to definitions and processes for the adoption of comprehensive plans. The purpose of the plan or a comprehensive plan is to plan ahead, generally looking 10 years out. And the comp plan helps to remove the planning process from kind of immediate political consideration and to allow more objective analysis of community growth and needs. So you're looking at the needs of the community, looking out 10 years or so, and trying to plan for that, so that plan is in place for future decisions to be made over the years by different boards, land use boards, generally planning boards, town boards, zoning board of appeals. There is a definition for what a comp plan is provided by the state, and I'll just read out this very technical definition. It is the means and materials, written and or graphic, including but not limited to maps, charts, studies, resolutions, reports, and other descriptive material that identify the goals, objectives, principles, guidelines, policies, standards, devices, and instruments for the immediate and long-range protection, enhancement, growth, and development of the town. So generally, comp plans can address or do address the goals, the objectives, and the policies of the town. They generally look at the existing and proposed land uses and their intensity. They generally, depending on the location of the community, may speak to agricultural uses, historic resources, cultural resources, natural resources, things that are worthy of protection that are important to the community. They almost always talk about the population, the demographics, and the socioeconomic trends, transportation, utilities and infrastructure, including cell coverage, housing needs, economic development, energy, climate change. And the comp plan always kind of ends in the last chapter, which is the implementation of those goals, objectives, and policies. So the meat of the document is identifying the goals and objectives, and then the last piece is, how are you going to implement that? If you picked up a half a dozen comp plans in Westchester County, they would typically have, just in terms of, like, if you looked at a table of contents for a typical comp plan in Westchester County, it would have a very thorough introduction, history of the town, growth patterns and projections, would have a very detailed vision statement of, what the vision of the community is in the next 10 years. And there'd be a list of goals and objectives. Then there'd be separate chapters, and those chapters can kind of run the gamut, but the important items facing the community, and they could be zoning, population and housing, economics, environmental resources, community facilities, transportation, infrastructure. And those are typically chapters in the comprehensive plan, and within each chapter, under each category, there would be a description of the existing condition, the projections, concerns, impacts, and recommendations associated with each category. And as I mentioned, probably the most important section following that would be the implementation section, which would identify a list of action items really for the town board to consider over the next number of years to implement the goals and objectives of the comp plan. As important as the comp plan is, analyzing the environmental impact of the implementation of that plan. And comp plans are subject to the State Environmental Quality Review Act. They are type 1 actions under SECRA, which means that it's an action that's more likely to require the preparation of an environmental impact statement, and many of them do. Generally, from what I've seen in this area anyway, in most recent years, is the comp plan is prepared simultaneously with an environmental impact statement. And the environmental impact statement is evaluating, what the impact is going to be of implementing that plan. And the town board in this case would have to, or is going to be required to, evaluate that and come to some sort of secret determination prior to adopting the plan. And 9 times out of 10, I think that communities just realize that, and they simultaneously track an EIS with their comp plan. The adoption of the comp plan will require a public hearing, at least one, and requires a referral to the county planning board under the general municipal law. And again, once a comp plan is adopted, all the land use regulations that come afterwards have to be consistent with that plan. And generally, the more descriptive and tighter your comprehensive plan, the more defined your land use laws will be in the future, because you're providing direct direction to future land use decisions. So that's kind of just like an overall snapshot of what a comp plan is. I could take questions now. I could go a little bit into, maybe a little bit more into specifics with regards to Lewisboro and maybe the things that you knowing the town should be cognizant of, moving forward. But I'll leave it up to you, Katie, how you want to kind of run the next portion of it.
Maybe what would be helpful in terms of talking generally about comprehensive planning, what are some kind of common misconceptions? Like what is a comprehensive plan? What is not a comprehensive plan, I should say?
Yeah. Well, what's not a comprehensive plan is a law, right? It's not going to tell you what you can and cannot do. It's giving advice to future planning decisions on what should be done in the town to meet your goals and objectives. So you're not going to adopt a comprehensive plan and the next day the zoning's going to change. It's kind of just laying the framework for what the town believes is important in the future development of the town. It's really just a guidebook, a blueprint for the next 10 years of, what are the important issues and how they should be kind of implemented and resolved to meet the goals and objectives. And sometimes it just, a recommendation might be that additional studies needed. Sometimes you can have a town-wide comprehensive plan and, the size of Lewisboro and the different hamlets, it's a tremendous undertaking. There might be a town-wide comprehensive plan, and then there might be, hamlet-specific plans that come out of it. Maybe there's a recommendation if there's a particular issue in a particular hamlet that an additional study's required. So it's not the end-all be-all. It's a planning document to help you plan in the future.
I have a question. If it's really just a recommendation, I know it carries more weight than just a recommendation, but if it's a recommendation, why would a CEQA, the state environmental quality, what's the I'm not sure I know what the abbreviation is for.
Environmental Quality Review Act. Mm-hmm.
Environmental Quality Review Act. If it's just a recommendation, why would it need to be? Why would it need to go to the state for a review?
It doesn't go to the state. It's that any land use decision, any decision of the board, any governmental body, that board is responsible for evaluating the impact of the decisions. So this requires that type of review. That review would be undertaken by the town board in this case, because they would be adopting the plan. And it's, recommendations probably too loose of a term. If I use that, it carries more weight than that, because if the comprehensive plan says you need to do X, Y, and Z, and the town board at a future date does A, B, and C, that's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, and that action could be challenged, shouldn't take place. So you're providing a pretty defined framework for the future decision making, and that can come with it impacts. So that's why it has this type 1 classification, which is like the higher end, there's a preconceived notion that it could result in a significant impact and therefore may require the preparation of an EIS, which is often the case. That just means if you make a recommendation in the zoning code that you change the zoning from half acre to acre in this section of town. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean for the environment and future planning decisions? And it requires you to take your recommendation another step further to really understand what kind of impact that's going to have long-term on the community.
So, given that our current plan is 35 years old, how much impact has that plan been in your time as planner in the last, or even the last 10 years? Is it really, do people really, do you look back at it? I mean, or is it still?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, that's the document that we have on record. There's been efforts over the years to update that, but they went pretty far along. But those recommendations and the plan never got adopted. So we are working with that older plan. But when decisions are made, any land use decision has to evaluate the consistency with that particular plan. But I'll say this, a comprehensive plan is, you could probably read it and find things that support a particular decision and things that may not, and if it's very vaguely written, it's easier to say, yeah, this is consistent, or, it just doesn't speak to this particular action. So
Jan, is it fair to say that if something appears to be somewhat inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, which John is quite right, it's 35 years old, there has to be some rationalization within the legislation or in the EIS of the development project that, although, as you said, taking various elements of the comprehensive plan and saying, well, it's not consistent, but it's consistent with this part. And, it has a consistency on the general vision of the plan. So it's not so, if it doesn't conform, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you have to explain why you're doing it.
Yeah. And I hesitate to answer that question, just not, having the, not being an attorney, but generally your land use decisions have to be consistent with the plan. So if there's something obvious in the comprehensive plan that is in sharp contrast to the action that you're considering as either a town board or a planning board or a ZBA, that action shouldn't be taken.
Have you ever had an action that wasn't taken because it wasn't consistent with the plan since you've been here?
In Lewisboro, I can't say that I have. I mean, actions, I can kind of recall situations where we've said, hey, that's not consistent, and then the law gets modified so it's a little bit more consistent, so it doesn't, where the law started out and where it ended up, where it was modified because of that plan. But in other municipalities, I have, and I've seen either projects fall apart, laws put, on the back shelf, or in some cases the plan revised. It's not something that is put on a shelf or hopefully and just not looked at again. It can be revised, and if a project comes down the road, or situations change and a revision needs to be made to the comp plan so that the action and the comp plan are consistent. I mean, that does happen. It's not overnight, but there's certain things that you're not going to consider everything. It's just impossible to consider everything. So you try your best, you hit what you think is the most important. But if something comes up in the future and it's can be perceived as being inconsistent with the plan, but it's got real good merit, could be positive for the town, it's not unheard of for the plan to be revised.
Keeping in the theme of sort of high level, what is comprehensive planning? I was wondering if you could walk us just a little bit through the process, how comprehensive plan updates happen, and what the role of the public and the consultant is in that process.
Sure. And this is, I've been involved in the preparation of a couple comprehensive plans for communities, and I've certainly sat on a couple committees and even in my own town. But I wouldn't suggest that I'm a comprehensive plan expert. This is not all I do. It's a very small component of it. So I'll give you a snapshot. But from what I see, generally you have a town board, in this case, creating a committee that represents the community. And generally that committee, somewhere between 7 and 11 members, something like that. It could be any size you want. It's not statutory, but you want enough people on the committee that there's a broad representation of the community, and not too many that just nothing ever gets done. So you have a committee, and that committee generally works with a professional planner in the preparation of the plan and community kind of input and engagement. And I think that in any case, and especially in Lewisboro, and it's going to be important to engage the community as early on in the process as possible. And without kind of community input and getting stakeholders involved, without kind of broad support and knowledge of what's going on, the plans sometimes fall apart because things are being done in a vacuum. And I'm not saying that this is the case here at all, but I'm just stating that if a plan is done in a vacuum by a committee without outreach to the community, a lot of times it falls apart at the finish line. So I always recommend, and that's what planning is all about: public participation, involvement, community engagement. And I would absolutely kind of recommend that. And that could take the form of, during the planning process, during the preparation of the plan, which, sometimes, no less than a year, 18 months could, it's not a short process. You might have a handful of community meetings, town hall sessions, charrettes, public hearings. A lot of towns do surveys to the community to kind of get a feel of what's important to the residents and the business owners, et cetera. So that's not set in stone, but there's a variety of different tools that you can use to get community input. And from my experience there's I think a lot of I think it would be important for the committee or the town to engage somebody that that's kind of their expertise, public engagement in the planning process. That's certainly not me, but there's, I've been involved in comprehensive plans where they have specific consultants that do that, and they're very good at it, and it's very effective. I think because Lewisboro has, several different hamlets, there's should be a focus, right, on trying to reach out to each of the hamlets. They're all very different, and they have their own concerns and needs, and I can envision separate kind of engagements with each of the hamlets, and then perhaps some town-wide. I think it'll be important for the committee and the consultant to speak to government leaders, business owners, homeowners, real estate agents, developers, folks that own large tracts of land, to understand where they're coming from, in their, what they see, especially with the real estate community. And I think you should be aware of other planning efforts in other towns that, surround you, because what they're planning for is going to have a direct involvement in what's happening in Lewisboro. And that goes across the state line, obviously, and also at the county level. And kind of what I've seen over the years in Lewisboro, being that so much of the town is in the New York City watershed and has, constraints, reservoirs, a lot of water resources, lakes, wetlands. There has always been this careful balance between environmental conservation and development, business development. And unfortunately, with 75% of the community being in the DEP watershed, there's a lot of restrictions that come into play, and specifically with regards to infrastructure, septic and sewer and that type of thing. There's just restrictions on it that are preventing growth. So water and sewer infrastructure has always been a hot topic in Lewisboro, especially in the lake communities. And there's, obviously been this, this issue or concern between environmental conservation and commercial development that's needed to grow and offset taxes for the homeowners. So that's always, I'm sure that's not going to go away in your endeavors here. So I would strongly suggest that the committee or the town retain somebody to assist them. It's not an easy endeavor. It's not really for the layman. The committee should be guided by a professional, especially with the preparation of the technical studies, and the secret analysis that will come with it, and the community and public engagement that is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we all really want to hear all about your thoughts specifically about Lewisboro. Before we jump into that, are there any other general questions about comprehensive planning process or the content of a comprehensive plan for Jan? Okay. Yeah, then I think we can.
Mark has something.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Couple things. EIS. So we come up with our plan. We go through the consultant. It's blessed by the town board, and then can you walk us through the timeline for the EIS and who conducts that? And is that a multi-year process? Is that shepherded by the planning consultant, or just talk to us a little bit about that EIS step?
Yeah, and it's done before the plan's adopted, right? And it's generally done at the same time and can be the same document. It's generally referred to as a generic environmental impact statement because you're not looking at a particular site. You're kind of looking at the impacts on a much more regional level. So there's distinctions between environmental impact statements and generic environmental impact statements, and this would most definitely fall into the generic category. So it's definitely typically done by the same consultant. The planning consultant that's kind of helping you prepare the comprehensive plan is also evaluating those recommendations and impacts and developing the impact statement. And it doesn't have to be an impact statement. It can be an environmental assessment form. But it's the timing and the expense is not that much different, and it's safer to safeguard your document, and probably just expect to do an impact statement would be my suggestion. But
and it could be a collaborative effort with you, Jan, because the town with the planning board, etc. So it's something that could be done collaboratively.
it absolutely could. Yep. But I wouldn't be overly concerned about the impact statement. I mean, it's an important component, and you don't want to go through this exercise and the time and expense and then be challenged and and not, have taken a hard look at, your proposal with regards to impact on the environment. So, but it's done generally simultaneously. It tends to be done kind of, you'll have your public hearing, you'll have your review of the impact statement, and it kind of all comes together at the end of the process typically. And it's typically done by the same consultant.
Did you have another?
Obviously, the complexity of it has a lot to do with the recommendations in your plan. If you're going to take half the town and go from 4 acres to 2 acres, that's going to have an impact, and you're going to have to evaluate that from a lot of different perspectives. I'm not saying that you're proposing that, but the complexity of the impact statement has a lot to do with the recommendations that come out of your plan. So, but yeah, definitely a critical component.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, is that a gating factor? Like we get our public input, we revise the plan, and then we go through this third-party review of our plan that meets certain standards. And how long do we wait for that to come back? And do they say thumbs up or no, you guys were not aggressive enough with wetland?
Yeah, it's not a third-party review. The responsibility of the preparer will be the same planning consultant that you have prepare the plan. The town board will have to review the environmental impact statement, and they're going to be issuing the secret determination before they adopt the plan. So it's not getting shipped out to the state and some, third party is reviewing the plan to see if you did a good job or not, or if you evaluated it correctly. It's done. The responsibility comes down to the board that's adopting the plan. That'd be the town board. So they have to be comfortable that they have evaluated the impacts of the plan, and they have to be comfortable that, or have to either determine that it's going to be too impactful and the plan shouldn't be adopted, or there'd be an insignificant amount of impacts and therefore the plan can be adopted. It's kind of that.
So it's a self-assessment then.
Yeah, by the town. Yep. It's challengeable, by, through like Article 78 proceedings, but the town board is going to be responsible for its secret determinations.
Thank you.
Great. Any other general questions? Okay, so yeah, we'd love to hear just thoughts about what would be unique or what we should know about Lewisboro in the context of updating the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot more to say other than what I did. I think the uniqueness comes from the size of the town and the fact that you have several different hamlets with different needs and objectives. So it's not like you have one downtown and you're surrounded by residential development. You have different communities within your town, and there's different things going on there. And there's, I think it's going to be important to look at each separately, but then also together. So I think the uniqueness comes from getting involvement from the different community groups in each of those hamlets and understanding what the issues are and the goals and objectives are of those communities. And then the other is the issue is the balance between environmental conservation and growth, and coupled with the fact that you're in the New York City watershed, and that makes a lot of things more restrictive in terms of development, if that's your goal.
Jan, are there any areas that you think in the zoning ordinance that needs updating because of current technology, like solar farms and stuff like that? Are there any like pockets?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's communities, and I could think of a couple nearby that are considering or have adopted solar legislation. I don't think that our ordinance really prohibits it in any way, um, but it's not something that's very well specifically addressed. Um, we certainly allow, you know, residential solar installations on roofs, on ground mount. So there's really nothing preventing that from happening, but it's it's not something that is clear in the code. Cell is probably something that cell coverage, you know, to have an idea of the gaps. You know, we typically get a cell application and we're kind of figuring out the need, but maybe to have a more regional assessment of the town. I think that may be underway. The town might be involved in a separate master plan for that. That's happening in Westchester County, but I think that will be important.
Are there any updates like in the Croton plan or an agreement with DEC or DEP that we should look at and update our plans for wetlands and stormwater, et cetera?
No, I mean, stormwater, you know, I think your ordinance is very consistent with the regs. You know, I don't think there's anything that really needs to be modified there. And your wetland law, you know, we have attempted to modify a couple of times, but we've made, you know, recently there was some changes that made things a little bit easier, but kind of a moving target. I've always had some suggestions about kind of just making the process a little bit easier, but it works the way it is. It's just a matter of there's probably always room for improvement, you know, some of the wetland laws.
John, have you seen any community plans that address town committees? You know, this town has not a huge staff, and so it relies heavily on town committees. Have you seen any, you know, I'm thinking that one of the outputs of ours might be suggestions of either additional committees or changing charters of committees or anything as the world's changing, technology's changing, things like that. We need to have the town be aware of them and ready to take advantage of them. Have you seen any of that in plans?
Not that come to mind. I don't think it's off limits, certainly, but I can't say that I have. I've been involved in communities that, and they're mainly villages that have larger representation on their boards than your typical 5-member, and I've been involved in plans that speak about, you know, changing the number of board seats, but those are villages that allow, you know, more than 5, and I think all the zoning board, the planning board, and the town board are all 5. So that wouldn't really come into play, but addressing chairmanships or chairs of boards, probably not
Not so
appropriate.
much chairs, but charters.
Oh, charters. I don't know, do you have an example of a particular?
Well, I mean, we had an antenna committee that was focused on cells, but I think the communication technology, for instance, is going to be dramatically changing over the next few years. You know, so that would be an example where you might want to refocus a board.
Yeah, I mean, there could be recommendations about reevaluating the charter or the goals of a particular committee, and kind of generally. I could see that happening. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but it's certainly, you know, applicable. It could, you know, if that's an issue that needs to be addressed, I think it could certainly be a component of the plan.
I think that would come after we find out where the emphasis is by the residents and the populace and where we want to go onto the goals.
Yeah.
So it's something that sort of comes at the back end if that's something that is brought up, or it's something that you want to bring up, then that can be brought up with the consultant. Jan, I have one question about trends. Do you see any trends with like working at home with COVID, or any other trends you see during this period of time?
I think I see, and it's not going to be news to anybody, but there's definitely more people working from home, right? There's more people at their homes more often. I don't know if it's such the case in Lewisboro, because you don't have a huge office market, but in other communities, the office space is a lot of times vacant. There's huge vacancies in professional office space.
You see a lot of repurposing in your other communities?
I think that's probably coming. I haven't seen it yet. It's just too new, but there's going to need to be, particularly in the office market, I think. Obviously, retail's been difficult to begin with, even before COVID, with online sales. But I think the office market's gonna be hard to recover. So many people working from home, and the infrastructure is there to do it, and it's much more widely accepted by employers now that I'm seeing, and I'm sure you've seen it, Charlene, right? Just on the planning board, the number of home offices we've seen above garages and things of that nature, and it's a direct involvement or directly associated with COVID.
Jan has brought that up.
Yeah, so looking at the zoning for home-based offices and that type of thing, I could see as being an item, and that'd be something Lewisboro would want to look at.
Speaking of trends, just in your time working with the town, just generally, have you seen things evolve in a certain way or change at all?
Well, right now you have a lot of improvements, and this isn't unique to Lewisboro, but a lot of residential improvements. People are home, and they're making improvements to their residences, and I think the building department and just the industry in general is incredibly busy right now. People are making significant improvements on their homes, and that's probably been for the last year or so. So the trend is, additions, pools, that the residential development on existing properties in Lewisboro is I would imagine, very strong right now. That's what I see. The days of 10 lot subdivisions, I think, right now we're not seeing a lot of, where you had large tracts of land that are gobbled up. We haven't seen a lot of that. It's more estates and people making improvements to their private residences and businesses.
And I have a question for you. Land use in Lewisboro is overwhelmingly oriented towards residential uses, low intensity residential uses. But we do have pockets of commercial uses throughout the town.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience in working for the town and reviewing, applications, can you tell us a little bit about things that business owners or entrepreneurs, potential business owners, would like to do, but things that come up again and again that they can't, whether it's related to like food uses or signage, or are there certain things that you see over and over again that restricts the commercial vitality of the town?
Well, there's limited commercial zoning, right? So within the existing zoning, the limitations are generally parking related, and infrastructure related, well and septic, right? So a lot of uses can't come here, or change of uses can't occur because there's existing septic systems that can't be expanded upon. And unfortunately, in the New York City watershed, like installation of wastewater treatment plants isn't generally permitted. So I see the restriction on an infrastructure basis in the existing zoning, commercial zoning districts. Things that I see business owners have to deal with, and it's, I'm not saying it's shouldn't be the case, but if you're changing uses in Lewisboro, and it's not unique to Lewisboro, many communities have this type of legislation where you're changing a use from A to B, and the use is going to become more intense by requiring more parking or more water sewer demand. It has to go to the planning board. Those are change of use permits. I don't know if that's persuaded people from not opening. It's generally been just part of business, and I think the rules are there for a reason. But that is one thing that, like, a new business owner should be aware of. You may not just be able to find a vacancy and move in. If your use is different from the prior use that's on the books of the town, and your use is more intense, there could be approvals beyond just going to the building department or just opening up. Signage, I can't really speak to. I don't get involved in it, but generally with new business owners entering existing tenant space, it generally comes down to parking, sewer, water, and the approval process.
So just as a quick follow-up, so like or follow-ups, the parking for like a office use may be different than for retail use, maybe require more parking. And
correct.
So that would be the limiting factor. And then for the infrastructure, I guess like a food use or a commercial kitchen would require a lot more septic capacity, because you have to have more bathrooms, I guess, depending on how many seats you have.
Right.
So that's an example of like the infrastructure that you talked about. Right? It's a limiting factor. Okay.
Yep.
So I have two questions. You've already touched on them, but so your day-to-day familiarity with the plan as an instrument to guide decisions, inadequacies or items that are irrelevant. So if you were doing a refresh here, what stands out as being irrelevant or inadequate and causing friction and deliberation?
Well, give me a topic and I'll react to it, whether I think it's irrelevant or not. I went over what I thought were the relevant topics. But what do you have something in mind that you'd like to get a feeling of whether it should be in or out of a comprehensive plan?
Okay. Well, another way to look at it is, so the process we're going through right now, we are engaging the public, and we're starting with a survey, and then there's going to be, various touch points to get reaction from people. And so then I'm sort of thinking, how do we balance the reaction we get? Let's say people say, actually, we got the survey and nobody was interested in wetland setbacks. So they think, so we're going to, let's not focus on the wetland setbacks. Maybe we can eliminate that consideration. Or everybody's really concerned about air transportation, and a lot of people said they want an airport. So, well, that's great. They want an airport, or people don't really care about the wetlands. So does that? So then, how? I guess I'm just wondering how how those responses are going to inform our plan.
Right. Well, your plan's not going to touch on everything, so I think that you're right in engaging the community to find out what's important. Some things you're going to know, right off the bat you have to address, but other things you may not be aware of. So I think getting the community's input will help direct what you need to analyze in the comp plan. Hopefully there's a bunch of things that are working just fine that you don't have to touch. And you might just say that in your comp plan. Hey, we have a wetlands law. It seems to be working. Nobody seems too concerned about it. So, we're not recommending any sort of significant, changes to that particular law, just giving it as an example. So I think that the meat and potatoes of your comp plan is going to come from the hot button items that the community tells you are issues that need to be addressed, and things that you just know that need to be addressed because you live here and you see it and feel it, on a day-to-day basis.
I was trying to get a gut check on how ambitious we can be, and with some,
it's the problem is, it's, if you try to address everything, it's, you'll be here forever, and it's going to become too generalistic. I think that you should mention there's items that you need to address, and then I would reach out to specifically the kind of the hamlets and try to see what their issues are and try to address them in the plan. But you try to cover the items so that future town board decisions and planning decisions aren't reactionary, right, to something that's happening now. It's, okay, we already thought about this, we have a plan, and this is how we think it should be implemented. So you have to be forward thinking in that way.
Great. Other questions for Jan? Okay.
Actually, before we call it, I do have a question. Maybe this is something that should have asked in the beginning, but Jan, can you just give us like some examples? I know what your title is, but I don't really know like the types of things that you deal with and review on like a day-to-day basis for the town of Lewisboro. So can you just give us like some like general, like high level examples of like the types of applications or the types of things that you're typically called on to review for the town?
Sure. And I'm one member of the firm. Our firm handles civil engineering, land use planning, and wetland consultation, for the town. So me specifically, I'm a certified wetland delineator, wetland consultant, and I'm a certified planner. So I tend to look at things from the planning and wetland environmental standpoint. My partner, Joe Tremelli, is the person that handles the civil engineering aspects for the town generally. And, probably 80% of the work we do for the town is reviewing planning board applications and applications before the building, some applications before the building department. So every single application that goes before the planning board, we provide technical review of. We provide guidance to the board in the processing of that application. We assist in the preparation of the resolutions and the seeker evaluations of those particular projects. So anything before the board, we're hands-on, working with the board, reviewing, providing technical expertise in the review of every single application before the planning board. And then applications that don't hit the threshold for planning board review that are just before, in the building department, if they hit certain thresholds for either wetland permits or stormwater permits that don't hit the criteria for planning board, we provide technical review to the building inspector on those particular wetland and stormwater applications. So if it's in a wetland buffer, we're reviewing it. And if it meets the threshold for stormwater permits under the local and state regulations, we're reviewing it, providing technical expertise to either the building inspector or the planning board. And then for the town board, we're involved in their capital improvement projects. We're assist the town in the preparation of local laws and the seeker evaluations for those local laws. And really anything that the board needs guidance on from a land use or engineering perspective, drainage, sewer, water, that type of thing, where they're experts in that fashion.
Thanks.
That's helpful. Any other final questions? Okay, well, this has been very helpful. I hope that I know the committee members have all really been taking notes, and this has been really helpful for us. I hope everybody watching on YouTube also found this helpful and interesting, and we encourage you to keep tuning in and being involved in the process. But Jan, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be here, and if you have any questions or want any sort of follow-up, please let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. We will see you all on Tuesday at 7:30 for our project launch meeting. Thanks.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I motion to adjourn the meeting. Can I get a second? Larry and Charlene second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody.